Okay, I think the big moment has arrived where we're going to be able to start our interview with our guest this evening. Uh, Tracie Onstad Bills, who told me that in casual conversation, she just calls herself Tracie Bills or even Tracie, since she's pretty casual, and we appreciate that. Thank you for being here, Tracie. We really appreciate it. Tracie has worked in waste hauling and moving all of the waste that we create and making it environmentally processed and accountable for 3 decades, and she has a long history of dealing with all the kind of stuff that is a consequence of how we generate waste as a society. And we're really fortunate to have her today. She's the current executive director of an organization called the California Resource Recovery Association, which I'm going to ask her a little bit to tell about the mission of that. And she also works for a company called HDR Engineering, and is, heavily involved in dealing with the things that we don't want to deal with, which is all of the waste that we create as a society. Thank you very much for being here, Tracie, and we are so fortunate to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited. It was nice chatting with you last week, and I'm just inspired by all the work you guys are doing. I had no idea. So thanks for opening my eyes to your group as well.
There's always a seat at the table for you. So, so,
Thank you.
so you feel free to come. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey, first of all, and just tell you why you got interested in this particular area of environmentalism and how that happened, and if there was like a key moment to where you said, this is where I'm going to work? Because, most people don't want anything to do with our garbage, as the word is, kind of a thing. And it's an extremely important part of keeping society going.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Ever since I was little, I actually attribute it to my uncle why I'm in the environmental field. He was a hippie, long beard, long hair. He'd take me kayaking and hiking. He's not a Native American, but he had very much that mentality of you take from the earth, you give back to the earth, sustainability. And I actually wanted to be a teacher to be able to teach all of that. And long story short, I ended up working for a garbage company. And you're correct, it wasn't really on my vision of what my career path was going to be. I kind of randomly fell into it after college. But I have to tell you, it's addicting, it's innovative, and it's really incredible. So I've been in the industry 30 years, and I can't imagine doing anything else. It's pretty awesome. So, working with HDR, we are a 12,000 person 12,000 person company, 70 countries we work in. We do transportation power remediation. It's kind of crazy, all the different things that we actually do as the company. My group, we focus on designing and permitting, constructing transfer stations, recycling, and composting facilities. And then we also perform feasibility studies. We do waste characterizations. We design zero waste plans. And my favorite thing is, once you get through all of that, the implementation of the programs and the behavior change side of things. So, but it's kind of cool because I've been in the industry for I worked for a garbage company, I worked for a municipality, a nonprofit, and I've been consulting for 20 years. And over the last 15 years, I've been a part of the California Resource Recovery Association, which is kind of the near and dear to my heart. I was a board member for 9 years, advisor, and then, long story, they asked me to be the executive director, which I've been for the last 5 years. The cool thing about CRRA is we're a nonprofit. It's the largest state recycling organization in the country. We started 50 years ago. It's kind of cool. This year, 50 years on Earth Day. And our primary mission is we're dedicated to achieving environmental sustainability in and beyond California through zero waste strategies, which obviously include product stewardship, waste prevention, reuse, recycling, and composting. So I don't know if you want me to go more into CRRA. We've got some cool stuff we're doing there, as well as with HDR.
We'll make room for it. I mean, we can talk about it if you want. I mean, I had mentioned to you, I did my zero waste training with CRRA like 15, 16 years ago, something like that. So it was a while back. So I've been familiar with the group for a long time. And it does kind of fly under the radar. And I think waste accountability and producer accountability and all of the stuff that we're talking about with respect to what a huge, massive part of the environmental problems we face this is, tends to kind of go under the radar. It's maybe not as sexy as solar energy or, trying to make the, electric vehicles or whatever kind of a thing, all the things that we also are important and we're working on in other ways too. And so I'm curious about your perspective of the challenge of getting people to think about the fact that I like the words resource recovery aid, in CRRA, because we need to start thinking, if we're going to be sustainable, we can't use the term throw away. We can't think about stuff that we use once and no longer have any use for. We have to think about the fact that our waste products are actually a resource, and there's something that we need to utilize if we're going to have any hope whatsoever to have a sustainable society.
Well, that's the number one thing about zero waste is the change in mindset that it is a resource. We are used to that linear, we take, we waste, it's like, and it just goes away. People don't really think too much about it. And we're changing to a circular economy, which is huge impact to the greenhouse gas and climate things that we're going through. With regards to zero waste, CRRA does teach a zero waste course, and the classes that you took 15 years ago was through an EPA grant, which was super cool, where we consolidated down to teaching zero waste and talk, all the different principles that go into zero waste. And the other part of that, though, and this is, I think everybody can identify with, this behavior change. I've spent my entire career working with communities, trying to get them to do what we want them to do, right? And how do you make that such a huge impact, and how do you make change? And so there's one thing I would plug. It's called community-based social marketing, CBSM. There's a gentleman, Doug McKenzie Moore. He does trainings, and it's pretty cool because it's like selecting the behavior, identifying barriers and benefits, developing strategies, and then you pilot it, and you implement it, and then you evaluate and you kind of redo it. But it's creating the framework in everything we do. So whether it's climate, whether it's energy, whether it's water or waste, it gives you a good framework and figuring out what resonates with people so that you can make that change. And we use it pretty extensively in waste. I would say the one crazy thing about waste is, you're right, it's the last thing people usually think about, and yet it's the most important, because everything we do, you were talking about the plastics and the litter pickup and all of that, if it's not managed properly, it creates huge problems, the plastic gyres and all of that. So our responsibility in making sure that we're providing programs that are not only easily to understand, but also how we want people, like the expectations are very clear. It gets complicated, every state, every city, different programs, different requirements, different legislation. But it is pretty cool because, working on a national level, everybody, you guys all know this, everybody looks at California. We do the most, we have the most legislation. We all probably make a lot of mistakes with those legislations, but the bottom line is being able to impact that change.
Yeah, and we'll use that to segue to SB 54 in just a minute. But I also wanted to ask you before we did that. I shared with you our little, very non-scientific, very simple report from our little community cleanup, which is, feels like, a little mom and pop cleanup kind of thing. But is the experience that we had in that report indicative of what you think is true throughout the state in terms of the products we had, the type of products we had, the waste that we encountered?
Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen any, Keep California Beautiful, and they do a lot of litter studies. They do the same sort of thing where they pick out the brands and stuff. It seems pretty typical. The cigarette butts are huge, obviously. And then the disposables that come from the fast food. There was a study that we did in Oakland, and we use actually GIS mapping to do different layers of the types of trash and whatnot. And the number one thing there was the Taco Bell packets. So I think it's important because the producers need to understand that what they're producing is not ending up where they anticipate, or maybe they just don't care. But it does, everything that you do in that, even small, makes an impact. So
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah.
great.
And those little sauce packets, which, if I ever do find myself in a position of buying food from a type of place like that, I try to not get those sauce packets and give them back to them. They're typically made with a plastic bag that is lined with metal, essentially. And so, like we were talking about, mixed material was the words I couldn't come up with earlier, which Andy put in the chat for me. And those are the kind of things that they're basically here indefinitely. There's no human being on Earth today who will live longer than that packaging. And so they're really problematic. And then something like the cigarette butts, we were talking when we were doing the waste cleanup. I think very few people are aware that the filter in those cigarette butts is cellulose acetate, which is a plasticized product. It is not a cotton thing. Most people who smoke think that that's a biodegradable thing. They could just throw it out. Don't worry about it, kid. It'll, degrade and break down over time. It's actually a source of microplastics and a source of pollution there. Those are just two examples of really, really common things, but they're both things that we could address if we required the producer to be accountable for the waste that they're producing, instead of just expecting every person on the street to have that common knowledge and to have the investment of, collective civic pride or whatever, like we're relying on now, to not have that problem. So SB 54 addresses some of that. It has targets that have to be met. And I know you've been involved with discussions of the actual implementation and the work with Cal Recycle on those kind of things. Can you talk a little bit about the mission of SB 54, and are we going to meet those targets? Are we going to be on schedule from them? Because I know they're ambitious. They don't look that ambitious when you first look at them, but I know they're so much more ambitious than what anybody else is doing. So give me the context on that as I babble.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's an extended producer responsibility law, EPR. Senate Bill 54. It's epic. It's legendary. It's probably the most important piece of legislation that was passed in June of 2022 that we'll probably see ever in our lifetime. It's called, and it's a mouthful, Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act. And just to put it in perspective, Europe and Canada, they've been doing EPR for the last 15 something years.
And
And it
EPR
took
is?
extended producer responsibility. Yeah, and Oregon just passed, California, Colorado, Maine, Minnesota. The last year and a half, things are going gangbusters where all of a sudden the US is falling in line. And each piece of legislation is a little different, but they have very common trends. So the SB 54 law requires all producers to reduce packaging waste and ensure it gets recycled to meet our state's recycling and climate goals. So this is a climate impact, but it's also diversion as well. Producers will ensure that packaging and plastic foodware sold in California is recyclable or compostable. So basically, EPR gives the primary responsibility for managing products after the use of life back to the producers, which makes sense because you think about all of the household hazardous waste and electronic waste, we're held responsible for it. We end up paying into a kitty to get rid of it at the end of life. So this is really exciting. And they also require the producers to design and market products that are more easily either reusable or recyclable. So we're actually putting it back on them, saying, hey, we're tired of paying for what you guys are producing. You need to create a more sustainable package. So that's pretty huge. The law itself, it's got 3 primary goals, and this is all surrounding packaging and plastic food serviceware. So packaging and then the food serviceware. So basically cutting single-use plastics by 25%, recycling 65% of the single-use plastic, and then ensuring 100% of these single-use plastics and plastic foodware is recycled or composted. So it's supposed to happen by 2032, which is crazy because we're now, the legislation was obviously passed. The state's working on the regulations, which probably they say by the end of the year, but they have like hundreds of comments on the first pass. So it'll be interesting to how that all functions. And one of the things I did want to kind of give you guys an update on, and what SB 54, the things that will happen over the next year or two. They actually created an SB 54 advisory board, which is pretty cool. There's 13 voting members. They were elected or appointed by the governor, and they started in January. And they're from local government, environmental justice organizations, manufacturers, recycling, and enterprises, and then retail and grocery associations. So they were trying to get a group together that kind of represented the entire picture with producers. And then there's 3 non-voting members on there. And Circular Action Alliance was just appointed as our producer responsibility organization. It's called the PRO. And they were just hired on a couple of months ago. And they're the ones that are going to make sure they're going to have a plan. And they're the ones that are going to make sure the producers are doing what they need to be doing. So the producers have to sign up with CAA, and they're the ones that have to report out with what they're doing with their design changes and all of that. So I think that's pretty exciting. And the role of the advisory board is to basically provide feedback on the material list. So the state just came up with what's recyclable and compostable, and this material list is going to be used by all of the producers. So they help to design that list. They're helping work about like assist with the needs assessment, other things that they're just going to kind of make sure their advisory role to Cal Recycle as well as the Circular Action Alliance. So they're pretty important for sure. And then the other thing I would just wanted to mention was the needs assessment. So Cal Recycle is a variety of different projects, and one of the most important one is the needs assessment. And they do it for source reduction. They're doing for recyclability and stuff, and it's basically identifying the gaps. So you're asking a producer if they're selling products in California and they need to have it recyclable or compostable, you have to create this entire infrastructure to understand how many pieces are they selling, what kind of pieces are they selling, what are they, how are they going to transition it. There's billions of dollars that's going to be funded from the producers within the California infrastructure. How is that money going to be handled? Who gets what money? How much money do you get per piece? Like, it's really complex. And California, we're in the baby steps of all of this. Oregon's I think they're about a year ahead of us. So it's going to be really exciting to see how this all transpires. So it's really complicated. There's a lot more to the legislation, and the people in the advisory committee, I know a number of them, and they're like, we're still trying to figure out. I asked them all these questions. They're like, we really don't know yet. So I think it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch the progress for sure. And we actually, HDR just finished the needs assessment in Colorado. We just got hired for Maryland, and we're hopeful to be able to do the work in California. We'll see. They haven't hired for that yet. So fingers crossed.
It is exciting, and we will definitely watch. You know, there's a couple of things that in what you were saying, though, that do come to mind, and that I want to play a little bit of a devil's advocate on. You know, one of the things I hear from people sometimes is, you know, we work so hard to pass these things and then they don't get enforced. I'll give you an example. Our plastic bag ban was just a mess and it didn't work. There's been some attempt to change that this year with updated legislation. We have something in Los Angeles County where or Los Angeles City rather, where we have a ban on those two-stroke engine gas-powered leaf blowers. That's been in effect for 26 years now, and you still see them used regularly because it's just not enforced. You know, we have mom and pop restaurants that are still giving out styrofoam containers occasionally on things, even though that's been banned for a while. So what would you say that to us to give us some hope that with this Circular Action Alliance and with the plans that are going forward, that we have a better chance of actually enforcing these rules and not just making rules that some will follow if they're high profile and others will just basically blow off because no one is going to do anything about it?
Well, I would say, you know, the state, if you talked about mandatory recycling organics legislation in the past, probably 10 years ago, there was no teeth to it. So there was no enforcement. It was kind of like, it was nice having a stepping stone, but it wasn't really helpful. Then you move on to the organics legislation, Senate Bill 1383. There's enforcement. Cal Recycle is coming down on people, fining, getting them set up on plans. SB 54 has teeth in it. It's got requirements and enforcement, and Cal Recycle has shown that they're actually following through with that. They're hiring like crazy to make sure that they're able to enforce it. And they're the ones that are going to make sure that the Circular Action Alliance actually follows through with all of it. I think it's still going to be yet to be seen as to if they really will enforce, but I actually do have confidence in it. There's a lot of people really want to make this change. And the fact that I mean, this is significant. The fact that the law passed means that those producers, the brands, are actually at the table, and that I'm sure they had to make tweaks to make it appropriate for them to approve it. But regardless, Circular Action Alliance, they actually are currently funded by the brands. So they actually do have a seat at the table. They feel like they can make impact. And I do think that they want to do the right thing. It's just, I'm hopeful that the legislation and teeth that's in the legislation will provide CalRecycle with that stick to be able to enforce it. I know what you mean. You don't want to waste your time.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I'm less optimistic to you that all of them want to actually participate and make things better, but hey,
Agreed.
I'll take the optimism. The other thing I want to ask you about and get your take on, and I think I told you I was going to ask you this question, but you didn't answer it, is I push back really hard from the standpoint of greenwashing when I hear about compostable plastics.
Ugh.
And part of the reason is, most of the stuff that we're calling, if you're talking about a piece of cardboard, if you're talking about a paper bag that doesn't have bleach in it and that's compostable, it gets food grease on it, I'm with you. That's great. But when it comes to the things that we're calling compostable plastics, I know that they don't work in the municipal waste stream generally, because typically they require a specialized facility that has all kinds of sorting and exposure to sunlight so that they can break down in a very specific fashion that I can detail the scientific terms for all that, but I won't, because you guys don't care. But essentially in LA, in our 1383 compliant green bins, they don't accept any of those compostable plastics because they will not break down in that system. And so if those are allowed to be part of producer accountability, and yet they will still end up in our landfills and they will not break in them, are we not just kind of greenwashing the problem? And what's the solution to that?
Well, it's funny you say that. I was just at a conference in Oregon, and Oregon's really worried because they're focused. They only have food scraps. They don't allow any compostable products in their compost stream. And I will tell you, almost all of the composters in California don't want compostable products, be it plastics or whatever, either, because of that same problem. The cool thing with the EPR legislation is that there's also another piece of legislation. It's called truth in labeling. And the state is making sure that if it, and they're, I mean, obviously it's going to be a long process, but if it says it's recyclable or compostable, it has to be recyclable or compostable, and compostable to what our compost systems will allow. So if you look at the recyclable or compostable list that's been created, and it's on the website for CalRecycle, if you look at what's allowed to be composted, it's almost nothing. It's like pure paper and things like that. They're not really adding in the bioplastics and the others because it's not accepted. So I think the truth in labeling legislation kind of partners with the EPR, but it is a very big picture because these new brands spend a lot of money. They've got a lot of lobbying power. So we can be hopeful that the legislation is good as it is, but you never know what the rebuttal may be in the future. But at least the state does seem to be adding legislation that will help support that. Greenwashing is a massive issue, and it's mostly because of the labeling that goes along with that. So.
Yeah, but it's also in the advertising. I mean, that's one of the things we hear right now is we have there are three major brands that produce soft drinks. There are three major corporations: PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, and Keurig Dr. Pepper, which between the three of them, they pretty much do everything. They have a big PR campaign right now where they're telling everybody, hey, don't worry about those plastic bottles. They're mostly recycled anyway. Don't worry about the caps. Don't worry about the labels. We won't talk about that part. And they are using PET, which is a more recycled plastic than any other plastic. But all that stuff's also available in aluminum cans, which are already recycled and much more recyclable, and they're profitable to recycle. But they would rather sell it to you in plastic because there's a better profit margin. It's easier for them to ship, things they don't want to deal with. And so I'm highly skeptical of relying on the private sector to get to those places. And so I appreciate that people like you are out there doing that work. And is there ever going to be a situation where plastic makes sense as a food packaging material? Because I don't think it does.
Well, I think that let's see what legislation we have passed that will pass. And then there's we're totally skeptical. And to be honest, I know I sound optimistic. I feel like that's part of my role, is to make sure that,
Sure.
I stay positive, because otherwise we'll go crazy, right? But you're absolutely right. Why did they move from a bimetal food can, for like chicken broth to the cartons? Like the stuff that they do doesn't make any sense, other than they're looking at it from the greenhouse gas. It's personal, right? They want to take care of themselves and their bottom line. But yeah, I don't know. I think we need a whole nother hour to have that conversation.
I get it. I hear you, and I appreciate that. I mean, I'm reminded of something that politicians are always quick to say, that we're going to remove these burdensome regulations. And I encourage all of you, whenever you hear a politician say that and you have an opportunity to do so, press them on what regulations they're talking about. Because nearly every regulation that we have as part of society came from a standpoint of doing something to protect workers, to protect people who are using products and consumers, and just the health of our citizenry in general. I'm not saying all regulations are perfect and we need to constantly reevaluate them. That's part of what we need to do to be engaged in society. But don't let anybody get away and say they're just, taxes are all bad, those taxes go to fund society, and that all regulations are bad. Push back on those things and don't just accept those as truths, as an overriding material. Make a politician specify what they're talking about and find out what they want to do. Because otherwise, if they're just cutting taxes for the rich, or they're just basically eliminating regulations that corporations don't want to spend money to deal with, they're not doing that work for you. They're doing that work for people who are paying for their campaigns. And that's something as we as advocates, regardless of the political party or the politician, we need to push back on that kind of language every time we hear it. And so, Tracie, I think you have just rocked this, and I appreciate all the information you've given us, and you've done it in a way that's digestible and easy to accept and understand. And we truly appreciate that. We appreciate the work that you're doing, and that somebody's excited about garbage. I know the people in waste hauling don't like to hear that word. They don't like that word because it has a negative connotation. But the truth of the matter is, it's an extremely important part of society that that makes it an extremely important part of sustainability. So I'm going to ask you a question that I'll wrap up with, and then we will open it up to our general audience here for questions that they have for you. But this is a question I always ask as part of the interview process when I do this. We as advocates, and this is true of every area of climate change, every area of environmentalism, we face a lot of challenges. And a lot of times you're in a situation where you just are repeatedly kind of crushed in what you're doing because of the burdens of advocacy, which is that you face insurmountable odds in a lot of these challenges. And sometimes you know that we should do something that accounts to a 10, and then you learn we can do something and that only counts to a 2, because that's what's politically possible today. And you know that there's going to be a tremendous amount of damage to the fact that we're only doing a 2 today and not a 10. So that's all part of being an environmental advocate, and we all face it. But I think it's particularly useful to our group when we can hear from somebody like you who has had success and has continued to work on these things over years. What do you personally do when you have one of those days or one of those weeks or one of those months when just you don't make progress on the things you're working on, and you don't make headway, and it really is personally trying? And I'm asking about you, Tracie, the person, not you, Tracie, the executive director of CRRA, who has to be positive and all that. What do you do to keep going to work every day, to keep fighting the good fight, to keep thrusting your head against the wall until it eventually kind of opens, or falls down, kind of a thing, to keep yourself engaged in the fight?
Well, I think a couple things. First, remember, everything we do makes an impact. And so I keep telling myself that, like, one choice at a time, it actually does make a difference. I know at times it doesn't, but I have to believe that it does. I also remember, I think about, and I do a lot of work with individuals. A third of the group, they're already on board. They're happy. They're like in the same space as we are. There's a third that takes convincing, and then there's a third that they may never ever see where we are. So I like to try to understand who they are. They're the ones that we're beating our head against the wall for, right? And they're the most, I think they're the most difficult. But I try to stay focused on what's true to me, the environment that's important, that I reach out to my network. We support each other because we're surrounded by our, like-minded people. And I always say, if you can't go in the front door, you go in the back door, right? So if I have a really hard day, I think, what is that back door that's going to get me where I need to go, that's going to make that impact and change? You plant a seed and it'll eventually grow. And I really believe that. And sometimes it may take a couple years to grow, but eventually it will. And so for me, it's just never giving up. The environment is way too important. And just using my support system to get me pumped up. It's one of the reasons why I do with the CRRA hat. I love being a part of the group. You know, you have all of your peers, your people who motivate you. You have a bad day and you call them and they're like, yes, but remember the successes that you have had. You'll continue to get those at some point. So, I
Okay.
mean, we're all in
Okay.
it together.
Yeah,
You all
yeah.
are
I mean,
amazing.
and you
Thank
got to
you
do
for
what
all
you
that
got
you
to
do.
do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there is something to be said for the fact that if you make it a little bit better than it was, then you feel good about that, even if it's not where it needs to be yet. So
Yeah.
that's a good answer, and I appreciate that. I'm going to open it up to all of you now. So if you could please either do like the little Zoom digital raising of your hand, or wave at me if you need me to do something kind of a thing, whatever works for you. And we're going to start with Laura. Why don't you, you're up for first with a question for Tracie.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Laura Fleming. I'm Environmental Sustainability Manager at a school, and worked with some 8th grade students this last year on a deep dive into the global plastics crisis, 12-week block where we studied this. So this is an issue I care about a lot, as do our students. And my question is about number 5, plastic. So it's my understanding is that, you know, primarily we can recycle number 1, number 2. Number 5, sometimes there's a market for it, sometimes there's not. And so sort of wondering where we're headed. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I appreciate that Charles is saying that he doesn't feel that there should be plastic food packaging at all, and I agree, and I wish we could go more toward cans, but do you see that they'll develop infrastructure to deal with that number 5 plastic, or do you see them trying to move toward number 2 that seems to be a more harder plastic that is recyclable?
Well, I hope through this EPR process that they actually do like 1s and 2s are on that list, hands down. Number 5 actually is very valuable, and markets do want it. It's the problem of actually capturing it, bailing it, and sending it off. So I did a study, and that's a whole nother subject, Keurig and the little pods. Those black little pods are 5s. Of course, everything else along with the contamination, they can't take them. And they actually drop out before they even get to the recycling system in the very front end. But it's my hope that through this whole EPR process, you think about Europe, right? They seem to have it way more dialed in. They're going back to source separation of materials for recyclability and stuff like that. It's my hope that with materialists that we have in California that we'll eventually get back there, because you're right, there's the 3 through 7s. After National Sword and all of that happened, they just went to the wayside, and now people are just going for the readily recyclables. And I'm hoping that trend continues and the producers do that. Yeah, I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I agree with you that all the other kinds of plastics, it just makes it more complicated, and I don't understand why we can't just go back to basics. And I thank you for your work. Schools and children, they're like the number one thing to get us in the right direction. They're our future. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Jeannie, you're up. What's your question for Tracie?
I have a question about materials. It seemed, I was thinking about like, the law about not using styrofoam containers, like businesses not using those kind of containers. And, I was just noticing when I went to the farmer's market the other day that I bought something it looked like a cardboard container, but it had plastic around the edges. So the composting gentleman from LA Compost said he couldn't compost it. And I was just like sort of an unintended consequence of moving away from styrofoam, but the replacement didn't really work. So I guess my question is about materials. And I have another thing that I noticed. I was just at a conference and there was like these they looked like plastic cups, but they said they were made out of corn. Anyway, so I'm curious about the technology of materials that are, replacing plastic or
Yeah, bioplastics are the corn. They're the bioplastics. They look like plastics. City of San Jose actually had used them in their events, right, to create a zero waste event. And they had a little green line, but they were clear. People thought that they were number 1 plastic. They didn't think they were bioplastic and compostable. And I think that's part of the truth in labeling and part of just the confusion based around the products. The corn-based, I think anyone's going to try to sell a product thinking that it's going to be the magic number. And because recycling is, of cups isn't really happening right now. They figure, oh, we'll put it in the compost. I'm hoping in California that will switch around with the truth in labeling and the EPR. It's complicated though, because you allow that into the system. It's confusing. People don't know. You look at it, they look exactly the same, So I don't know if that answers your question. I just think it's the products and bioplastics and the way they're certified. If they're BPI certified, that means they're compostable. Are they really? Because they may have done those tests in certain composting, depending on the heat and how long they were in the system, or maybe sometimes they screen after the first go pass of composting and they put it back in. Well, if you put it back in a second or third time, anything will, if it's compostable, it'll eventually degrade, but it's not necessarily our systems.
So I guess to clarify, are those not truly compostable or are they? No. Okay.
Well, everything we do it depends.
Okay.
So I can't say it's not or it is, but what I can tell you is most of the time it's not it may be degradable, but it's not going to be in the system long enough to degrade. It'll be screened out and landfilled. So it's just that, it's just economically not possible to have something in the system that long. So I would say, no, it's not going to be, composted because it takes too long to degrade. And so it'll be screened out and then thrown away. Yeah. I would just stay away from that, keep it to number one, plastics, number two, plastics, and that's the hard part about coffee. Starbucks, you go there, they've got paper cups, but the whole inside is a plastic lining and you can't compost that.
Lynn, I believe you had an analog hand up. You were one of the first ones. What's your question for Tracie?
I know, sorry, my computer did an update on my
All
content.
good. That's why we do both.
Hey, Tracie, what about SB 707? I believe
Which
it's
one's
up
that?
tomorrow. It's the Extended Producer Responsibility Act and the Textile Recovery Act.
Oh, that just passed.
Industry, right?
Yeah. That's pretty awesome. I will tell you, I am not an expert on that, but California Product Stewardship Council, they have a ton of stuff going on. In fact, they just spoke about it at the San Diego. They have a technical advisory committee. They just spoke about that. I know they're very excited that it's just passed or in the process of, I don't know too much about it, so I can't really answer that, but I would go to California Product Stewardship Council. They have everything on there. Yeah.
Tomorrow, it's hitting the floor tomorrow. And it's really got to do with all the fact that we're wearing polyester, nylon, and spandex, and it never biodegrades. And we also have a huge, over $3 billion impact on health industry. And that's just the beginning of it.
Yeah.
So I'm really working on that because I'm a consultant in the fashion industry.
Oh my gosh.
Asking my clients to divert their buys and all their input into using natural fibers only. But we have a problem in California because we don't have funding to develop these fibers. And
So I'm putting my email in there. Send me your email and I'll connect you with Joanne, who is working on this. You will love her.
I work
Yeah.
with Joanne. I work
Oh.
with Joanne. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
I'm part of that whole crew.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I will say EPR is new for me the last couple of years. I've been mostly working on program implementation and things like that. So the policy side, I try to keep up on it, but CPSC, they're the ones that really are the movers and shakers in the legislative area.
I think there needs to be more legislation because of the impact of all the fabrics going into the water systems.
Mm-hmm.
And that is affecting all of us. So if you look at the Olympics coming, I'm hoping they're doing water testing before and after in Europe, because it's going to impact us when they come here. So I'm trying to legislate. I would love to see legislation that we stop any of these fibers being used in the athletes' clothing.
That's amazing. Thank you for all you do.
That's a goal.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Betsy, what's your question for Tracie?
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really interesting. I work at Sustainable Works and I teach sustainability to high school and college students. And one of the things that I talk about is like potential future ways to deal with plastic is what I was reading about with chemical recycling for plastic. And I wanted to see, because you probably have a lot more updated, is that in the near future actually possible? Because I know that they're looking at ways to do the chemical recycling.
So California is really hard to permit anything outside of the basics, recycling facilities and even compost facilities. It takes 6 to 8 years to permit, which is crazy to me. You look at other different kinds of paralysis and other, kinds of technologies that are going to change the form. It's more difficult to permit here. I do think it is the future, but from a zero waste perspective, looking at the higher, better use, making sure it's recycled properly, and that it doesn't add any more toxins than we already have in our environment. So I think that would be the only concern with regards to the chemical component to that. But it will be interesting because as we move forward over the years and things change and technology changes, I think we have one of the most innovative industries. I grew up in Silicon Valley, and I always say, yeah, I know everybody thinks high tech is innovative, but this industry really is. So I don't really have anything. I know that there's not too much going on in California. They just put a new plastics recycler in Southern California, but I don't think they're doing anything quite that advanced. So, but it will be interesting to watch for sure. But I guess my biggest, the skepticism in me is just make sure that whatever they end up doing, that it's not adding more toxins and it's actually giving us a product that we can use in the future that's really kind of taking it and truly recycling it, not just like incineration, getting rid of it.
Right. Yeah, because it does seem like it has a lot of positives and negatives to it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Paula, you were a part of our cleanup that we did in May. Yeah, you have a question for Tracie?
Yeah, I took part in that Palms neighborhood cleanup back in May, like Charles mentioned. And as he said, most of the garbage, I was surprised at the amount of garbage in the different brands that we did in our inventory, but most of it was from fast food. And I was just wondering, Tracie, what brands or what fast food brands do you find are doing the best at addressing waste?
Oh gosh, I would say none of them. But if I were to choose, I actually think In-N-Out, they have a sustainability director, and I think that they do try to do the best that they can with the products they have. But to be honest, I don't really like any. Yeah, I just feel and I think the thing that we have to remember is, we're one state. And then you look at everywhere else, and even in Europe, who is really advanced, they still have the same products. And that's my concern and my skepticism with, EPR. I know it can work depending on the products, but and it's unfortunate, like we can't even really bring reusable, like our own. We wanted to go and get a hamburger or whatever and leave all the packaging behind, and can you put this in our container? They just don't do that. We're not set up for that. That's my hope for the future, is that not just a sustainable option, but to also allow for us to be able to reuse like that.
And that's often a violation of local health ordinances as well, because if you bring in a contaminated, let's say you didn't wash your container to the standards, or they can't verify that you did, and then somebody touches a spoon in the kitchen to that, and so we're not
Fear of liability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We do edible food recovery now in the state because of some legislation, and we've had to do a lot of education with regards to the laws that protect, the Good Samaritan laws that protect those that are donating food. It's just unfortunate that lawyers get involved in all that.
Yep, you have a question for Tracie?
Yeah, hi Tracie. My question is more about the behavioral side of it. And I live in an apartment complex with I think 22 different units. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And
feeling your pain.
oh yeah, so the issue is we've had a compost bin for 9 months, and a neighbor of mine who's also very concerned she did sort of a program of putting both in Spanish and in English, like what you need to do to compost, and it's been 9 months now, and I feel like I'm the only one and she's the only one that really composts. So I'm curious as to how do we go about and try to get them to compost. I don't know if this is your expertise or not, but
It's exactly what I spent almost 30 years working in multifamily and businesses. And I would say it's really difficult because, when you're in a residence and you have your container, if you get a little tag that says you messed up, you take it personally because you own that container. And in a multifamily, there's 22 people dumping into containers and they don't care. There's no repercussion of them if they do it wrong or not. It really comes down to, and this is something I tell the apartment complex, the contracts that you sign, the leases that you sign, it has to have something in there that requires them to follow recycling or organics laws. And if they don't, there's got to be some sort of penalty or something. That's the only way that it's going to happen. Other than that, having your collection company take it to what we call a dirty or mixed MRF, and they sort through the trash. Because multifamily, it is the hardest nut to crack, because especially when people leave, they're gone, they don't care, they just leave everything there, they throw it in the landfill bin, and yeah, it's one of the things, the CBSM that I manage, that I talked about, they actually will do pilots at different locations, and they'll try different strategies. If we give them a pail, if we give them like information, if we create these little nasty notes, it's CSI, you can tell who's not recycling by the labels that are put in the trash. So you can usually find out who's doing and who's not doing. But oftentimes apartment complexes don't want to put the effort in, unfortunately. Yeah.
Two things I want to follow up with you on what you just said, because they're of particular interest to me, and I think people would be interested in knowing. First of all, I wanted to define dirty MRF for people so they know it's not too much of an inside baseball thing, but that would be a materials recovery facility, and it is a place where it sounds like the panacea of all things is they let you just dump all your waste in one giant container, then they take it to a place, and then the factory, the facility, essentially separates that out into what's recyclable and what isn't, and we don't put the burden so much on the consumer. Sounds ideal, but one of the main problems is that there's cross-contamination. So many of the things that are recyclable get contaminated by other waste that's in the stream and becomes unrecyclable. Tracie, can you give us some insight on the percentage of stuff that gets recycled that goes through a dirty MRF?
Oh, at most 30%, at most. And if you think about it, waste characterization, for residential, commercial is obviously a little different. You could probably recycle 75% of what's put in the waste stream, but only like 25-30% is actually able to be removed from the facility. And it's crazy, the contamination levels are so high. Before COVID, commercial was around 20%, residential was around 5%, 5 to 7%. After COVID, residential went up to be between 10-15% contamination in the recycling bins, and over 30 to 35% in commercial, which is crazy. So not only are we trying to get people to do the right thing, but as you can see from the contamination result is crazy. And I will say that while mixed MRFs, they thought that was the future, that take all your landfill and sort it. San Jose has that, and they also have recycling and organics because they wanted everything touched. And they're actually going back to a regular 3-bin system because it's just not as effective as they thought it would be. Yeah. So really the behavior is that we want everybody to be like Europe, do the right thing and keep the materials clean.
Yeah, I mean, those are challenges. I live in multifamily residential in Los Angeles, as do the majority of citizens in the city of LA. And my Athens is our waste hauler in this area, and they're probably one of the better ones from my experience. That they allowed our building to be one of the very first pilot programs for 1383 compliance. So we had the green bin before any other multifamily residential in our area. We have a good group of people, about 20 people live in this building, and they were all on board. And even so, being like the eco nerd of the building, I had to constantly watch that bin. Occasionally somebody would throw in like a meat package that was in a, still wrapped in plastic and all that kind of stuff. And it kind of can effectively ruin the whole value of the program if that happens. And so even when you do have good people who have the buy-in, sometimes they just don't bother, or maybe they have a guest who is not on board. There's a lot of challenges we face with that particular path. There's no question.
Yeah, for sure. And I know in the notes, somebody had asked about what about schools? Schools to me are great. You have to have the champion, and this is anything, compost program, the multifamily. If you don't have a champion, it's hard to move things forward. But schools are great because kids they love this stuff. Give them a worm bin, get them able to do the sorting at lunchtime. They take ownership of it, but you still have to have an adult, preferably either a custodian or a principal or a teacher, to be the champion to make it work. But they're a lot more fun than multifamily.
Yeah, I hear you. So I want to give you a chance to plug your conference that you have coming up, if anybody really wants to go in a deeper dive in this direction.
Yeah, great. So CRA, we have a conference every year. It's a 3.5-day conference. It's going to be in Anaheim, and it starts on Sunday, August, I'm looking at the date, 18th, for an evening reception. And we're in Anaheim, so we're going downtown Disney for our welcome reception. We have the 19th all-day sessions. We have 50 exhibitors, but the big thing on Monday morning, we have Paul Hawken, who is a keynote. And I don't know if you guys know Paul Hawken, but he is a climate guru, advocate. He's an author. He's incredible. So he'll be our opening keynote. And then Tuesday we have keynotes as well as, we have over 65 speakers throughout the day. And then Wednesday we have tours and things like that. So highly recommend you taking a look at CRRA.com and seeing if you're interested in coming along there. Last year we had 1,000 people in attendance. We're expecting a lot of that. And it's, I would say 60% municipalities. We've got consultants, vendors, a lot of the garbage haulers. Athens will be there, Republic, Waste, they all go as well. So if you haven't, check it out, our website, and see if you're interested. But it's really a great group of people, and the networking's phenomenal.
Michael, can we throw that date up? If you go to CRRA.org, right? Is it .org? If we can,
Yeah.
can we throw those dates up on our calendar?
.com, actually.
We'll do that. We'll do
Yeah.
that. We'll figure it out. All right, folks. So Tracie, thank you so much for doing this. Just tremendously useful. You were just a wealth of knowledge, and I learned things tonight. I hope everybody learned things tonight. And it's so important that we remember that we are responsible for all the stuff we create and all the stuff we use, and the choices we make and the stuff we purchase and how we deal with that stuff after we use it. It's all tied into sustainability. It's all tied into the environmental movement that we are all a part of here. And thank you just so much for being willing to come and share your wealth of knowledge with us tonight. We really appreciate the work you're doing, and hope to extend an offer to you that if we can collaborate, if there are things that we can do to help provide support, we're kind of the noisy peanut gallery here. And if you need some extra people to rah-rah, that's what we're all here for. And we would appreciate any opportunity to help you do the important work you're doing. So thank you.
I love it. Thank you. I'll definitely take you up on it. We have a lot of advocates in CRA as well. So appreciate that. And I really appreciate all that you guys are doing. So thank you. Keep up the good fight.
Cool. Thank you very much. So here's the part of the meeting where we start to wrap things up. We have the trivia contest. So here's the way this works. If you've never done this before with us, you have to enter the answer into the chat. And the very first person that enters the correct, no error message into the chat will be the winner of the trivia tonight. We're going to do 2 trivia questions tonight. Both of the prizes, we haven't done this in a while. We're going to give away a Climate Reality Los Angeles chapter t-shirt. And so we have pretty much all the sizes. You can take a look at what the t-shirt looks like on our website if you want to take a look at it. If you don't win tonight and you want to buy one, we sell them at cost. They're made with 100% organic cotton with fair labor practices, about as sustainable as we could figure out a way to make them. And so if you want to buy one, we sell them for at cost on there, and you can certainly get involved in participating with that as well. All the funds go to support the local chapter. Some of them are donated to national in terms of they gave us the t-shirts. So that's how we could actually use those funds for local. All right. So first one's going to be an easy one if you're paying any attention tonight whatsoever. And we'll see who gets it first. If you win, you can either pick this shirt up from me at a future in-person Climate Reality LA Project, Climate Reality Project LA event, or I can mail it to you. I try to encourage you to come to an in-person event so I can meet you and hand it to you. And then I don't have to go to the post office, right? So that works out well. But if that doesn't work, we have the most sustainable packaging we could come up with, and we will mail it to you as well. Tracie is the executive director of CRRA. What does that stand for? Oh, come on. You guys could at least go back to our website and look it up. California Resource Recovery Association. Laura, you are the winner of the first t-shirt tonight. Congratulations. Let's hear it for Laura. Well done. So My email is charlesallenmiller@gmail.com, or you can contact us through the laclimatereality.org website. Get in touch with me and let me know the size you want, and if you want to come pick it up at a future event, or if you would like to have it mailed to you.
Charles
We're going to do
Allen-
one more, and this one's going to be even harder, though with the slowness of that first one, I'm a little curious if we're going to get this one at all. So when we were talking about SB 54 and we were talking about what Cal Recycle's doing and the enforcement teeth of all that, Tracie mentioned an advisory board that is going to be in charge of making sure that things actually are enforced, and it had the initial CAA. It is not Creative Artists Agencies for agency for those of you who are LA centric. What is the name that she was referring to that was abbreviated as CAA? This one's a tough one, but the t-shirt's worth it, right? Circular Action Alliance is correct, and that is Kip. Kip, you have done it. Applause. Yay for Kip. Very nice one. That was one of the more difficult ones we've had. So very well done. All right, so those are our 2 t-shirts. You remember from what I said, Kip, earlier on how to get in touch with me, and we'll get you a shirt. All good there. Thank you, everybody. We have 2 minutes left. Does anybody have a climate or environmentally related announcement that they would like to offer in the 2 minutes that we have? I'm not seeing anything. Tracie, thanks again for being here tonight. Real
Thank you.
pleasure to have you. We hope to see you again and hope to work with you. We loved having you here, and we loved having all of you here. Thank you, all of you, for coming here, spending your evening with us, spending a little bit of your valuable weekend time talking with other people who are nerding out on the idea that we need to save the planet. And that's really important. And so we really value you and thank you for being here. Yes, Laura, you sent me a direct message. That is correct. If anybody sent me a message during this and it was in the chat and I didn't get it, it's really hard for me to blather my mouth all the time and also monitor the chat. So you can contact me through the LA Climate Reality website. If I missed your question, I apologize, but that's how that happens sometimes. So we run the trains on time here, right? So that's pretty cool. I said we end at 8:30. It is 8:30. You are free to go forth and spread the good word that you have learned from Tracie tonight. Thank you very much. And we're calling it a wrap. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
night.
Godspeed.
Great to see you, everyone.